I think we have to realize that young people, if they're vulnerable, why they might be vulnerable, and approach it from that perspective. Because what we see in people who are thinking about it or who are vulnerable in some way, it's young people who are dealing with identity, they're trying to find a sense of belonging, and they are looking for a sense of purpose. And when we approach people, we approach them with respect, and there's a lot of engagement and dialogue. And part of that is being able to talk to people and build a relationship up in a real way before we can even start to talk about any of the issues of if they're radicalized or if they're indoctrinated. So it's a long process and it's done on a case-by-case basis, where you work with people and you work with them wherever they're at and work through the process. We assume that women have less agency than men, except they don't. So young women are going to be attracted to the messages of DAESH for exactly the same reason as young men. So if we want to stop people from being recruited, we actually have to deal with what are the issues they're facing and their vulnerabilities and why they want to join. And that's the way to deal with it. It's not just about, we can't just stop the message, right? Because the reality is that we don't want to be censoring speech, right? So how do you build the vulnerability in communities and society overall so people actually know themselves to push back against the message if they come across it? So social media is a communication platform, right? It's the reality of how we live, how all of us everyday existence. So it is used for communication. I think we have to realize that social media is not the only way to communicate. And when you are actually engaging with someone or there's a specific person, it's not just about the online pieces, they're also offline pieces. Because it's not just, it's about the world they live in. So we have to integrate the online and the offline pieces, and social media is a channel. The language we often hear is we have to do counter messages, and from our perspective, counter messages are never enough. Because if you're doing counter messages, you are playing by the rules of the terrorist groups, because you're always on the defensive. So what we talk about are meta-narratives. What are the normatives itself? Because we can establish the normative values, what it ought to be, right? And then so that it's clear that the messages that extremist groups are putting out, that's the deviation, and that's the one which is already outside of it. So you have to do alternatives, you have to do meta-narratives, alternative narratives, and counter-narratives, not just countering them.